A third day of protests have consumed parts of the Mideast amid boiling tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Now, this comes after Saudi Arabia executed an outspoken Shiite Muslim cleric and 46 others. Protesters set the Saudi embassy on fire in Tehran as retaliation. Lisa Daftari is editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk, and she is with us now to talk about all this. So, Lisa, first, before we even get into this, let's talk about the tensions that have dated back some 1,400 years between Shias and Sunni Muslims, and thus between Iran and Saudi Arabia being a Sunni country, Iran being a Shia country. Explain that for our viewers.
Right. So this conflict obviously wasn't born just over the weekend. There are two dates to keep in mind. The original conflict between these two rival groups started in the year 632, and that was upon the death of Muhammad, the prophet that all Muslims follow. They were fighting over who should succeed the prophet, and thus was born two sects of Islam that have been fighting all along. More recently, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution brought about what was this rebirth of Shiite radical Islamist agenda, which was this campaign that the Iranian regime had to spread its tentacles and to spread this Shiite influence throughout the region, which of course at the time and since for the last 36, almost 37 years has been the major concern of Sunni countries, particularly Saudi Arabia.
Is this really a religious divide we're talking about here, or is this more political about power and influence and control?
Right. So it obviously started as something that was religious, and now there's obviously differences in how they view Islamic law, but it's grown into this hegemonic desire for both countries, with Saudi Arabia representing the Sunni faction within the region, and Iran obviously with their agenda. Neither side has been shy about wanting to spread its tentacles in supporting and putting its money behind proxy groups. Iran started this again in 1979 with supporting Shiite groups in the region like Hezbollah to do its dirty work. So now we see Iran's hand in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in putting its money behind these groups, and Saudi Arabia step by step following and wanting to put its influence there as well.
And yeah, Lisa, and that it really is the question that we're talking about right now. As we see the tensions in the Middle East rise, we recognize, and I think for our viewers, it's important for them to understand exactly what is happening here, that there are these tensions between Iran, which is the largest Shia country in the region, trying to vie for power between some of these other Sunni states, and that not only includes Saudi Arabia, but for example, Qatar and other states, the United Arab Emirates, where there are Sunnis living there, and that is sort of what is at play, even in countries like Iraq, for example.
Right. So this divide has obviously been there. And what's happened over the weekend is now we're seeing this not choosing of the sides, or not even choosing the sides, but this divide becoming more clear cut in the Sunni countries really taking a side and pulling their influence and their diplomatic relations from Iran, and Iran obviously standing its ground. I think, you know, this comes back to a lot of the criticism that surrounded the Iran deal just a few months ago and over the past few years, in that many believe that if we're giving Iran all of this money and we're freezing all their assets and taking away a lot of these sanctions, that there should be behavioral changes that come along with that. And you have to look at Saudi Arabia on the other end. Saudi Arabia has two clear-cut goals. King Salman took over last January, and he's been very clear. He wants terrorism out of his country, and he wants Iran to stop spreading its influence within the region. So I think that with these two agendas at play, Iran wanting to spread itself and Saudi Arabia wanting to contain this Iranian influence within the region, is going to be at play and is the undertone of a lot of the different conflicts we're seeing, whether it's in Yemen or Syria or Iraq or anywhere else in the region.
Lisa, Iran has promised a, quote, divine intervention in response to the execution of this cleric. What exactly does that mean?
A more flexing of the muscles. Iran's not going to back down. We've never seen them back down, right? Even with all the money that we're giving them, they're not backing down vis-a-vis the U.S. and in treating the hostages, American hostages that are held in Iranian prisons. So again, you're seeing this Iranian behavior with them flexing their muscles. Saudi Arabia saying, look, we killed this guy symbolically. And let's just backtrack and say 47 people were executed in Saudi Arabia on Saturday. Only 4 of them were Shiite. The rest were Sunni and mostly part of Al-Qaeda. Meaning Saudi Arabia's point is very clear. We will not tolerate dissent within our borders or beyond them. So you see Iran flexing its muscles, saying we're going to seek revenge. We're going to symbolically stand our ground, whether it is in the region, in Syria, in Iraq, and in propping Bashar al-Assad, in propping the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And we're obviously going to stand up against our major rival in the region, Saudi Arabia.
And Lisa, in that scenario, we also, though, it's sort of there seems to be sort of a conflict there in that Iran has been very active in Iraq, where there's some 60% of the population in Iraq is Shia Muslim. They're in that country on the side of the United States and trying to prop up that government there.
Right. And I think what the United States has done is our policy has been the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So within Iraq, we're saying, well, we like Iran's help. With ISIS, we're saying, well, they're fighting the Sunni group ISIS, so we're going to be on Iran's side. But what the U.S. policy has to be here is not to just follow the enemy of my enemy all the way, but to be clear-cut about our agenda in the region if we want a seat at that table. And this is not the time to have this conversation about whether we should get involved or not and get involved or how we should get involved, but to say that the U.S. has to be clear about its agenda, just as the Saudis are clear about their agenda, and the Iranians are obviously very clear about their agenda. So we see these overlapping agendas and overlapping interests, and sometimes they are on our side and sometimes they're not. But we have to be clear about what we want.
Lisa Daftari, the editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure.